Hello everybody, it's me again. Yes, I'm not dead. I know I said I was recording the radio show, and that is coming. I'll give some more details on that as soon as I know them. But I also wanted to get back to making stuff properly on this channel as well, like talking about stuff that wasn't promotional, stuff for other things, etc. So, what I am going to do to start things off, albeit 2 or 3 days late now, it's the 2nd of January as I'm recording this, is to do the Evan Whitton Hour 2026 year in review. Not so much of the channel, because there wasn't a lot to really talk about there, but of the stuff that I listened to in 2025. But to kind of get on, say a little bit about the channel first, I think the shift to more kind of podcast style content has been good. I think the first one that I did was the Doctor Dark kind of listen through dissection with my good friend XD Cynical, who we both had a great time doing that. And I didn't expect her to enjoy that album in the way that she did, but I'm glad that she did, because then it is a great album. But I'll get onto that later on in the video. But I think also just having the freedom of doing it in a podcast format, because I wasn't reliant on trying to get a camera set up in the circumstance that I'm in now. A bit awkward to try and do that for reasons that I don't really need to get into now. But point being, but doing it in a podcast format was a lot easier, and B, also gave me a lot more freedom to just kind of be a bit looser, be a bit freer, and not be as kind of rigid, I guess, which to me is a good thing, because it allows me to kind of be more natural and more of a music fan rather than kind of playing as a music reviewer, if you like, which is what I prefer to do. So, the overrated albums, part one, other parts of that are coming. I'm going to start working on those. But also, the weird album rollouts one was one of my favourite ones to do. The Sleep Token kind of bashing video, but also kind of talking about genre fusions and things. That was a really cool one. Oh yeah, I did the Ween listen through. That was quite fun. Of course, the Forensic Record Society happened this year, I think. Yeah, that was in March-ish, I think. That was cool. We do definitely want to do more of those, and I think we're trying to figure out ways of switching up the format a little bit, which should be cool. But yeah, I think doing them in a looser format has worked for me. Spud has requested some more face cam stuff, so if I can find some way of doing that isn't the Forensic Record Society, then I will. But as far as I am now, I'm happy doing the sort of podcast type stuff, because that's what I enjoy doing. I enjoy talking about music, I enjoy nerding out about music, and I enjoy not having to make notes about every single album that I listen to week in, week out, which is quite nice. But to get on to the albums themselves then, what I wanted to do, as I said earlier today, is to kind of go over the albums that I put in my 2025 playlist, and kind of go through them chronologically, kind of call out the highlights, call out the lowlights, call out some interesting ones. And what I should say as well is that a lot of the albums that I put in to my kind of yearly playlist that I rack up, I haven't actually listened to yet, just because I'm very lazy and forget to do things. But it does mean that there are some albums in this playlist that I haven't listened to, but I want to and I will. So I remember in 2024, last year, or I suppose the year before last technically now, there was I would basically add an album to that playlist if I'd heard the name of somebody who might have worked with a band once. I added their album to the playlist. And so there are easily over 100 albums in that playlist, at least over 20 of which I haven't listened to. This year was definitely a lot more manageable, just in terms of straight numbers. It's probably close to 50, maybe not quite, which is a lot more manageable in terms of the stuff that I listen to. But still haven't listened to all of them. But even if I haven't, I'm going to call out the ones that I want to listen to, that I think are likely to be interesting, etc, etc. To start off, we actually have an album, the first one that came out last year in January, which is one that I won't actually touch on now, but I'll touch on later, because it kind of ties, because this person released 2 albums this year, supposed to be 3, but I'll get onto that. But let me tell you right off the bat, it is brilliant. What I can talk about first, though, is the introduction to me at the tail end of last year to Jamie Page, who is a Vocaloid breakbeat artist who Syndiquil was a big fan of, and she kind of turned me onto her stuff. I sort of thought it was a bit much at first, like a bit sensory overload. Like I remember on an episode of Forensic that we did, she sent in a kind of Hatsune Miku breakbeat song, not by Jamie Page, but by someone else in that scene, and I just thought it was way too much going on, like just absolutely why, just it hurt my brain listening to it. But then Jamie Page, actually for me, sometimes it was a bit much, granted, but a lot of times she hit that sweet spot in terms of like really lively production, but also very catchy choruses, very actually detailed and not cluttered and hectic production, some very nice vocal treatment, albeit the overly robotic sound can turn me off from time to time, definitely. But she was a real high point in my listening, particularly towards the tail end of last year. But with the deluxe release of Constant Companions, I listened to that through Cyndaquil quite a bit this year and quite liked what I heard from it as well. But also, Jamie Page then became involved with a band called Flavor Folly, which I think is her and a couple of other people whose names escape me right now, I apologise. And I would say that I found it interesting. There are definitely some good songs on here, like I would say Weather Girl and Snowflake are probably my favourite ones on the album. For me, it doesn't quite reach the heights of Constant Companions, not really anywhere near it, to be honest, but I just think that it continues to show that she is definitely one of the better kind of artists operating in that scene, where it's not just kind of throwing everything at the wall just to see what sticks. I mean, there is a bit of that, but like the stuff that doesn't stick, most of it she decides to take off the wall, if we're using this extended metaphor, which for me as a listener I quite appreciate. I mean, obviously, you know, Flavor Folly, as I said like 3 times already, not exactly reaching those same heights, but still displaying a lot of the same talents at least. So we've got that. Then next up in February, I believe, we had 2 big hitters for me right back to back, because we had House of All coming out with their 3rd album, which I can't actually remember. Oh no, it was House of All Souls is what it was called. I should probably get these in mind before talking about them. But this one was definitely this one grew on me a lot, I have to say, because it's cool for one, because Carl Burns is on the album, so that makes 3 ex-Fall drummers at once now, which is always a plus in my book. I mean, they don't all play on every single track, but they kind of chop and change and switch out, a bit like a sort of Pokemon party, I guess, if you want to put it that way. But I think it works really, really well. There are some great songs on here. Infamous Immoral Sister has this really kind of dark, foreboding, sort of medieval vibe to it, which is really nice. Oh Day Spring, with the use of what I think is a melodica, is really, really cool. And there's a lot of just like very wiry but bright post-punk guitars and some great bass riffs from, of course, the absolute legend Mr. Steve Hanley going on there. Paul Hanley is also on drums, does a great job. Martin Brahma as the kind of songwriter and band leader is also at the peak of his powers here. This is maybe not as kind of rough and ready as the other 2 House of All albums have been, because this one doesn't quite feel as monstrous sonically, but there's a lot of really cool intricacies going on that I don't think you would have heard on other House of All albums. So it shows that they're definitely expanding their palette, and it's not to say that it makes for worse songs. In fact, I'd say it makes for definitely more detailed and textured songs, just maybe not quite as, auditorily muscly in the same way, if you like, but still brilliant. And I'm very much looking forward to their newest album, Inklings, coming out in this coming March, which also cements their place as, regardless of their status as a full supergroup, just like puts them down as one of the most kind of, consistent but also prolific rock bands of the last 5 years, easily. So I'm really looking forward to that new album. And then, of course, after that, we had The Residents with Dr. Dark, which is really, I think, a return to form for them. It's a huge kind of multimedia kind of conceptual undertaking. There's a storyline going on, there's multiple characters, there's a lot of kind of art and visual stuff going around with the album as well, which is great. I do think that a tour for this, or a stage show of some kind, would be absolutely incredible. I know they were touring Eskimo next year, which is also going to be cool, because Eskimo is absolutely fantastic, a classic avant-garde album, obviously. But Dr. Dark, I think, really deserves its flowers. I'd say it's probably the best album they've done since The Ghost of Hope. Maybe, actually, do I think it's better than that? I mean, I do have a real soft spot for Ghost of Hope, but, like, it is super, super strong. Like, you know, they're playing with metal aesthetics, goes over a lot better than I think a lot of people thought it would. I always knew they were going to be good at that because a lot of the Talking Like Randy, Chuck and Bob stuff had a metal tinge to it, definitely with Nolan Cook's guitar playing. So it makes absolute sense here that they did well with it, despite the fact that Nolan Cook doesn't actually play on the album, unfortunately. But also, a lot of the electronic territory that they go in is really kind of cool and eerie and otherworldly and ethereal, as you would expect it to be, as well as a lot of the string arrangements brought by Edwin Outwater are very, very kind of evocative and kind of dignified. And they could, like, the Residents have always kind of had that thing where they kind of maybe go a bit overly juvenile or a bit overly, not mawkish, but I'm trying to think what the word is, where, like, if I would have heard on maybe some of their, like, kind of iffy, maybe late 90s output-ish, like, if I'd have heard that they were, like, hiring a string orchestra on, like, Wormwood, as much as I do kind of have a soft spot for Wormwood, like, it you know, it would have kind of maybe been a bit of a yikes moment, maybe, whereas here, it is done really, really well. I mean, perhaps it's because Edwin is reportedly such a massive Residents fan, but it goes over super well. And also, the tracks where they fuse all of these together are really, really cool. Like, The Gift is a definite highlight. Maggot Remembers is brilliant. I think Calm Before is maybe my favourite song on the whole album. Granted, it is more of a transitional piece, but the vocals from Pete Whitehead on that song in the intro are absolutely incredible. And I think a lot of the later moments are very, very strong and very, very evocative as well. The finale on Take Me to a River is genuinely breathtaking, and I think a lot of the production on tracks like Circle of Horns or The Gift Keeps Giving or A Choice or Old Man River, it's incredibly intricate, and there's also a lot of very, very subtle musical motifs and details that you have to listen through the whole album again to get again, but once you do, it's really gratifying. I mean, it is a lofty undertaking, being the longest album of their career at nearly 80 minutes, but I would say that it's worth it. So really, really please give Dr. Dark a go. It's brilliant. The Doves album also came out this year. I haven't listened to that, but I have definitely enjoyed Doves' output in the past. I think it was in 2020 or 2021 that they put out their last album that had Broken Eyes on it, which I thought was just a brilliant album, a great indie rock album. It was on rotation with my dad a lot, so I heard a lot of that. And so, you know, I'm surprised I haven't sat down and listened to this yet, but I have no doubt that it's going to be good once I do. And also what was a surprise was the kind of surprise release of the Wave EP Eternal, which I thought may as well have just been a deluxe expansion to City Lights, because City Lights came out in like late October and then this came out in like early February. So to me, these almost feel like deluxe tracks for that album, but they are also very, very good. Like Graham's songwriting is still incredible. Eleanor's vocals are absolutely beautiful, and a lot of the sonic textures that they play with kind of have this very dignified, gothic, kind of slightly medieval tinge to them, which you'd expect with a band called The Wave, maybe. But it just shows that they continue to do what they have been doing and do it very, very well. I love The Wave way more than I love Blur. I've never really been able... Well, no, Blur have some good songs, but I've never really been, like, fanboying over them in the same way that I have, like, Gorillaz, maybe. Like, I love Gorillaz very, very much, but, like, the Gorillaz didn't have my favourite album of 2024. Well, no, Underworld had that, but, like, The Wave were right up there. Like, I was really debating up until, like, the 31st of December. So, you know, The Wave are definitely a band that I would recommend all of you stay on the coattails of, because they are something really, really special, I think. There's a few albums here, actually there's a stretch of albums here that I haven't listened to that I really want to, so I can go through some of these now. Clipping have always been a rap group who I respect more in principle than in sound. It's like that classic thing, like you want to like something, but you can't really bring yourself to. Like clearly the rapping talent is there, clearly the inventive production is there, clearly, the concepts and the lyricism is there, and the performances, for the most part I've seen, are there, but something with them just doesn't click with me for some reason as much as it does Death Grips. And I know I can hear you typing now, oh, haha, white guy on the internet talking about music likes Death Grips, go figure. But I mean, also, as much as the memes about Death Grips have persisted over the years and are quite funny, especially about their fans, like, they, for me, really hit upon a sound that was as equally abrasive and experimental as it was accessible in a weird way. And I feel like with Clipping, they've just gone all the way into experimentation, which I can certainly respect. Being a fan of bands like The Residents and also a fan of Boredoms as well is maybe a good example. A lot of noise music I think is really, really cool, but there's just, there's something about Clipping that historically has just not clicked with me in quite the same way, but I'm hoping that when I eventually get round to their album that I will find something in it, and I'm sure I will. I really hope I do anyway. And there's also Guided by Voices, who I've more just had on my periphery for a few years as they're being continually referenced in the IT Crowd, although they did have that one album that had the song from the IT Crowd on it. What's that album called again? I can't even remember now. Alien Lanes. That album is genuinely good. I've listened to that through a couple of times, and I do genuinely enjoy it outside of the context of it being used in the funny computer program. They had a new album out in October. Are you serious? Oh, they had 2 albums out then this year, and I haven't listened to either of them. Well, more fool me then, I guess. I do wonder how good their songs can be at the rate that they put stuff out. So there is that. But, I'm sure it'd be enjoyable if I did eventually get around to listening to them, which I want to. None more being the case with Benefits, though, who have been on my periphery for a while due to their kind of association with the post-punk, Sleaford Mods, Billy No Mates, Dry Cleaning, Meryl Streak, all that stuff. They've been kind of, given praise by a lot of those guys, particularly Meryl Streak, who had an album last year that was utterly incredible. Please all go listen to that. Songs for the Deceased. Go out and buy it. Go out and see him. I saw him supporting Pill in 2023. And while he didn't quite click with me as much there, when going to revisit his music, I thought it was incredible. I also got to interview the guy, which was such an honour. And I thought, he was just the loveliest guy for one, but also just a really great artist and a really great lyricist and a really passionate one. But the point is, if he's saying that Benefits have got something about them that's worth diving into, I am absolutely going to believe him. And from the bits that I've heard from them, there is definitely a lot to be gained there. I just haven't quite really sat down and gone, right, I'm going to go and listen to this and really dissect it. Because I feel like with albums like Benefits, his albums, you want to have the time to sit down and dissect it. The grimy hip-hop influenced production, the bleak kind of stark lyricism. You want to really digest all of that properly rather than just kind of, flicking the odd song on from it and just kind of forgetting about it. So I want to get around to it. I definitely will, and I'm sure when I do, it'll probably place somewhere quite near the top in my yearly rankings. There's also the new album from The Darkness. I don't really know much about The Darkness, to be honest with you, apart from that Justin Hawkins seems a pretty cool guy, and they've had some bangers in the past. That one, Christmas Song, is pretty good. I Believe in a Thing Called Love, also pretty good. I've just never been into frilly trouser glam stuff, and they sort of seem to stray into that territory a bit. You'd think a band called The Darkness would maybe sound a bit cooler than they do. I mean, I know that that's probably sacrilege for some people, because I know that Justin Hawkins is clearly a very talented vocalist and songwriter, but, they've just never really been far enough into my musical output, or my orbit rather, that I've bothered to listen to them before now. But Pigs, I have bothered to listen to in the past. Their album, what was it called? The one in 2023. I actually thought it was pretty good. And their new one, Death Hilarious, I'm sure will also be pretty good in spots, given that it's also got an LP feature from Run the Jewels on it for some reason, which I want to figure out how that song goes over, because that sounds like a whole load of fun. But, I just like, again, they're one of those albums or one of those artists that I look at and go, yes, they're probably going to do some really good stuff. But they're not like a band that I'm itching and kind of cataloguing their every move right before they drop. So it's probably just to do with like a lack of that much interest where I want to go and dive into it. But again, like with Benefits, I'm sure when I do, there'll be stuff there that I enjoy. Onto stuff that I did listen to this year though. I was on there were quite a lot of good punk albums this year. I mean, first of all, the punk duo Softplay put out an expanded version of their Heavy Jelly album with a lot of songs that maybe wouldn't quite fit the mould of that album, either because stylistically they were a bit out of left field, or, they were just like a bit too brief or inconsequential or kind of stupid or openly comical. I mean, saying that, there are songs like Bin Juice Disaster on the original album, which is hardly like Shakespeare, is it? Like, clearly that's supposed to be funny, and clearly songs like Act Violently have a sense of humour to them, but there is a sense, I think, that the 6 tracks that they put on the end of that expanded edition wouldn't have fit on the original album. But I think kind of viewing it as just a self-contained EP also works just as well for it. And then Viagra Boys came back this year as well with, Cave World, when that came out in 2022, that was easily one of my favourite albums of that year. Just like really hilarious lyricism, but also quite socially conscious as well, combined with like absolutely manic performances, incredible vocal performances, great musicianship all round. The production was super noisy and fantastic. The kind of, all of the different kind of sonic ground that they covered on that album was incredible. I would say that this new album was a bit more polished, and for me it maybe wasn't quite as like, oh my god, revelatory, like mind-blowing as Cave World was, but it is still very, very strong. There are a lot of great songs on it all throughout this thing. Uno 2, The Bog Body, Man Made of Meat, those are just the singles, they're fantastic. I think River King, the closer, is also a very touching moment. Dirty Boys, I remember being very, very good as well. Store Policy, there's a lot of really great songs on there. The same thing, great performances, great lyricism, definitely a lot more of a kind of human, like inward-looking angle rather than an outwardly looking societal one like on Cave World, but still done very, very well with just a bit more polish, a bit more kind of pizzazz and sheen this time around. Maybe not like the 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 territory that, Cave World got into, but definitely kind of the high 7s up into the 8s is what I would say. And then Conflict came back this year with their first album in, I think, over 20 years of original material. I want to double check that though, because you can't say, you could say that I'm not a very good journalist, because truth is, I'm not. But if I remember correctly, their most recent album before this came out in like 2003. No, it was 2003. Yes, this is their first album of original material in over 20 years, and it is incredible. For those of you that don't know Conflict, classic anarcho-punk band, really great, just, super radical lyricism, a lot of genre shifts, like it's not just a punk album. Obviously, the punk tracks go super hard, as you would expect them to, but there's also, like, sound collages and piano balladry, and, like, there's a reggae switch on a couple of the tracks here. I think particularly the track Cut the Crap being very, very strong. Echoes is also a very moving moment that's kind of a bit more spacious and ballad-like. Obviously, granted, when there's albums like this, where the messaging in it is so radical and so kind of, it is very left-wing, a very left-wing album, that doesn't necessarily mean that I subscribe to every single one of the beliefs expressed within the album to the same level of fervour that they do. I don't really understand why I'm clarifying this, but I presume that, in the climate that we're living in nowadays, it's probably important to clarify that. A lot of the albums that I listen to do have very radical lyricism. Some bits of it I agree with, some bits of it I'm just not as educated enough on it to really cast any sort of meaningful opinion. But what I will say is that I absolutely respect the radicalism in the way that they're doing it, in that it's not like harmful radicalism where they're just like saying stupid shit that doesn't make any sense. Like tracks like Mother's Milk are like the most kind of stark and kind of disgusting and harrowing images of animal cruelty in terms of how it relates to veganism and animal rights and things like that. And like, I'm not a vegan, I probably never will be, but point being, like the belief that they have in these ideas very much comes across, and it's not a farce with them. It never is. And so I think the fact that they believe in these things so strongly, that not only do you get that passion coming across, but also, more importantly, I would think, the music is fantastic, the performances are brilliant, the chemistry between the group is incredible as well. And so I think it's also a real shame that their lead singer Colin passed away shortly after this album was issued, making it his last album with the group. But I have to say, what a note to go out on. Absolutely, I think this album is great. Give it a listen to if you haven't already. On a very different note, Pink Pantheress also dropped this year. She dropped her mixtape Fancy That. There are some great songs on this, right? Like, obviously the singles, Stateside and Tonight, were brilliant. I thought they were great as soon as they dropped, because it's just that classic Pink Pantheress, very catchy, sort of understated, quite retro, very sort of homespun and enjoyable. Maybe not like, club banger rager type stuff, but certainly one that can, get me dancing around my living room. And as soon as I heard that Underworld sample on the opening track Illegal, which has now become kind of the breakout hit from the album, I would say, that was a moment of pride for me, because I put it on and instantly I was like, I know the thing, I know that one. Like, it's kind of like me wojacking at the screen as soon as the album came on. But, that song's great on its own merits anyway. And, Tonight and Stars are both really great. Romeo, I think, is fantastic as well. I think this is just, granted, it is a little inconsequential, being, I think, not even 20 minutes, if I remember correctly. But, so maybe the argument could be made that it's not consequential enough, and so when put up to bat with some of the other great albums of this year, maybe it might slip down the rankings a bit, which, I can say personally for me, it kind of has, just because of that. But the strength of the songs here, and just the casuality with which they're done as well. It's not kind of like in a casual throwaway sort of sense, like, I'll put out anything, who cares? But like, the fact that you can clearly tell that she was having fun making this album and not kind of feeling the stress of having to deliver the next album, I think also does it a lot of favours. Then we had the Sleep Token album, which I've already talked about enough at length in another video that I'll put up in an iCard here. But point being, I don't think it's very good. I think the fusions of metal and R&B are not good at all. I think the production is really bad, and I think the more straight up R&B tracks are palatable broadly, but in terms of like a metal band doing that, I kind of feel like I know where their interests lie more, and so I'm wondering why they don't just do that instead of like forcing these really awful clashes of like metalcore and gent and R&B that for my money just don't really work at all. But what did work was the newest album from Billy No Mates, and this is what I wanted to get back to when right at the beginning of the year I said that somebody dropped 2 albums, because it was Billy No Mates. So she dropped Metal Horse in May, of course, or was it in June? My sense of dates are absolutely fried. No, it was in May, excuse me, it was in May, I lied. So there was that, but also in January she dropped the soundtrack to a West End play called Mary and the Hyenas. I'll talk about Mary and the Hyenas first, because it's obviously a very good album. Like, Billy's kind of sonic touchstones are all over it. Like, some really nice post-punky bass lines, great vibrant synthesizers, punchy drums, and her melodies and her songwriting just keep getting better and better and better and better. I would say that the messaging maybe isn't really aimed at me, because it is clearly a very a play all about kind of the female experience and kind of being a feminist, or kind of having some feministic ideals in the modern world and kind of, trying to pave your own path, and talks about like sisterhood and everything like that, and like troubles in relationships. Obviously, that stuff's not really aimed at me. What I will say is that there are a lot of albums and a lot of just examples of media, I think, in the last 10 years that, have feminist messaging but beat you over the head with it in such a patronising, condescending, kind of preachy soapbox kind of way that it's just super duper irritating, and I've got no time for it all. There are also examples of music put out recently over the last 10 years that have, shown feminist ideas and advocated for them in a clever and intelligent, an emotive and a human way. Slag Heap is a fantastic example. Their debut album was incredible, and I still listen to it regularly now, and I really, really want the Appetites EP to come out, even though that was shelved like over 3 years ago now. Please release it, guys, I'm begging you, because that was, the 2 singles from that were great, and they've had feminist messaging throughout all of their tracks. Never once have I thought it was annoying or preachy or condescending, and the exact same with this album. Like, yes, the ideas contained within it are very strong and very in your face and very principled, but they're done in a way that is intelligent, that is done with clearly a lot of thought, that is clearly more based on the human experience rather than some kind of intellectual kind of, glasses adjusting type principle, just kind of spouting statistics at you or whatever. It's a lot more kind of nuanced and relatable than that, which I think is why it goes over so much better. And I would say that the song Falling For You was a really pivotal moment for me, not because it's just a great piano ballad, but also I think, for whatever reason, it was just a song that I needed to hear this year, and so I kind of grew a bit of a personal attachment to it. Again, all of the songs on it are great. I think there isn't a song on it that I think falls flat at all, and the same could be said for Metal Horse, because my God, her bar has been so high ever since she came onto the scene. Like, her album in 2020 was my second favourite of that year. Her follow-up, Cacti, was my favourite of 2023. And so, with Metal Horse and with Mary and the Hyenas, because I'm kind of grading them all, both in, one spot. So if I rated one at number one and one at number 3, it would end at number 2, that kind of thing. I could say, on the strength of both of these, that they could have very easily landed at number 1, but there were some very, very, very strong albums that came out later on in the year that I'll get onto. But Metal Horse, I just find myself returning to again and again and again. The songwriting is so much more sophisticated than it was on her debut. She just keeps going from strength to strength, not only in terms of production, because a lot of it is a lot crisper, a lot brighter. She's definitely going out of the more openly post-punk territory and just embracing more kind of alternative pop, which I think is definitely what she has proved herself to be very, very good at increasingly, is just writing great pop songs, if you want to call them that. And this album is just absolutely full of them. Nothing Worth Winning is fantastic. The opening track, Metal Horse, The Test is incredible. Dark Horse Friend with Hugh Cornwell is definitely more of a sleeper on the album, but is also brilliant. Gas is one of my personal favourites. I think that the melodies and the harmonies on the chorus of that track are absolutely beautiful. Comedic Timing is also the same, and I just think the ending leg of this album, I mean, all of it is incredible, right? But the ending leg is particularly strong. You've got Gas, Comedic Timing, Strange Gifts, Moon Explodes. All 4 of some of the best tracks on this whole album get back to back to back to back right at the end of it, and it gives you such an emotional gut punch. It's incredible. The production's colourful, the performances are fantastic, and I think from seeing Billie live in October, having her play with a band now is clearly giving her so much joy and really leading to some fantastic kind of sonic possibilities in terms of the music that she's putting out now. So I say long may it continue, because both of these albums have been absolutely phenomenal. So well done, tour. I hope to see you live again soon. And please put out Tour Tape 2. You said it was coming out on Bandcamp this December, and it didn't. but I really want it because a lot of the singles that you put out in the lead up to it on Bandcamp have been incredible. So please do it. I love Tour Tape 1 in 2023. So do more of it, please. And then we get some more examples of albums that I didn't listen to this year, but I probably should have because, truth be told, I probably quite enjoy them. The number one example probably being Skunk Anansie, who put out their new album, or Skunk Anansie, I think is what they're called. Skunk Anansie? Anansie, yeah, that's the one. They've always been, again, one of those bands on my periphery. You know, they've always kind of been loosely associated with kind of the alternative 90s punk movement, which a lot of the stuff out of that, obviously, if you know anything about the channel or my taste at all, I've really enjoyed. I know Skin, the lead singer of Skunk, also did a track with Maxim in the early days, Carmen Queasy, that I really enjoyed. So all indications would say that I would enjoy that album. I've just not got the chance to listen to it yet, or I haven't bothered to listen to it yet, is probably the more accurate description. Same with Pulp, and as well as the new Little Sims album, which Little Sims, I particularly really enjoyed her album Drop 7 that she put out in 2023, I think it was. It did grow on me a lot. I think I ranked it quite low initially just because, again, it was quite short, quite brief. But the more I went back to it, the more I enjoyed it. And I've heard a lot of very, 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 very good things about this album in particular. So when I get round to it, I certainly will do. What was a bit of a disappointment, though, is the new Who's Who album, The Lost Tapes Volume 3, I think it is, who, and most known to me for having that Ulterior Motives song that was part of like an internet lost media search that went on. Turns out they wrote it for a porn film, which is where it was from. And then they, you know, the album that they put out on the back of that was pretty good. The follow-up that they made, not as good, but also, you know, had some pretty good bops on it. But from what I've heard, and I've only heard a couple of tracks from this, I've not listened to it in full again, it just seems to be a law of diminishing returns, really. Like, they just seem to be getting less and less good songwriters and just kind of delving more into cheesy, corny 80s kind of synth-led power ballad pastiche, and it's just not really doing it for me. Like, Ulterior Motives is a great song, and there were some other really great songs on that initial Who's Who kind of Lost Tapes album, but this just really did not have that same firepower as far as music was concerned. And one that I thought I would enjoy more than I did was the new Elbow EP, which was essentially an expansion to their album Audio Vertigo that they put out in 2024, that I did enjoy very, very much, because it seemed like they were getting back to a bit of a more straightforward, loud rock sound. I mean, Elbow have never been a loud band, but, you know, particularly albums like Leaders of the Free World definitely had a more openly rock-leaning sensibility to them, I would say. And so this being, Audio Vertigo being a return to that, was very much welcomed by me. And it seemed like the track on this EP were kind of following that, given that it's called Audio Vertigo Echo Elbow EP5, which, you know, the most easily pronounceable name in the history of album titles, obviously. But, you know, there's some good material on here. I mean, granted, there's only 4 songs, but I remember really enjoying Timber and Disgraceland, particularly, as well. But, you know, it's only 4 tracks, and they're basically just deluxe edition add-ons. It's not going to have as much of a punch as a full Elbow album would have, but still pretty enjoyable, I would say. Also, the same thing could be said for the new Ailstorm album, which pirate metal is ridiculous. This album is ridiculous, but it makes me laugh. For fuck's sake, there's a track called, like, Frozen Piss 2 on this album. How the hell am I meant to take it seriously? Point is, I'm not. It's pirate metal with songs about girls with big tits on it. Like that's the kind of thing that, you know, we're going with here. And, you know, it's juvenile, it's stupid, it's absolutely ridiculous, but it makes me laugh, and some of the riffs and grooves go kind of hard. That's all I really need, thank you. I enjoyed it. Is it going to be making the top of my albums list anytime soon? Hell no. But did I have a good time listening to it? Absolutely I did. They're kind of like Spinal Tap if they were like pirate performers, and also if they were real. Spinal Tap is brilliant, by the way. Spinal Tap 2, absolutely incredible film. Rest in peace, Rob Reiner. You will be much missed, because both of those films, Spinal Tap, this is going off piste a bit now, but Spinal Tap is one of the only examples of a film where they can wait for 40 years, bring out a sequel that, you could say that nobody asked for, really, and it be worth it. Because it was, in my opinion. It was absolutely incredible. Anyway, enough about that now. Ailstorm's good fun. I would recommend listening to it, if only once. K Tempest also put out a new album this year. I haven't listened to it yet. Again, it's another one of them. But I have absolutely loved K Tempest in the past. The only video that I've deleted, I think, in the history of this channel, once it's been properly finished and edited. Like, I've binned videos that I've been kind of like halfway through working on. I think I even binned a video that I'd edited fully, and just as I was about to click, the render to video file button, I just went nah and binned it. I think it was because the structure of that video was too loose, way too not thought through, and I was actually just rambling, even more than I would do right now. So I took that video down, but basically what it was is just talking about how much I love K Tempest music, and that is true. Everybody Down was fantastic. The Book of Traps and Lessons, incredible. My favourite album of theirs, though, has to be Let Them Eat Chaos, which is just a really super dark, industrial, kind of really compelling storytelling album that I loved a lot when I discovered it in lockdown. And so, I have no reason to think that this new album would be any different. Granted, I was a little iffy on parts of the last album, The Line is a Curve, I believe it was called. There were some brilliant moments on it regardless, so I'm sure when I get to it, there'll be some highlights, no doubt. What I did really enjoy was the new surprise drop of the big special album, National Average, which I've only actually listened to a handful of times, but I really, really need to go back to, because I get the feeling that I've not quite got everything out of it that I will do or can do, because their first album, Post-Industrial Hometown Blues, I thought was incredible. It was the top of my 2024 list for ages. There are great songs all the way across that album. Shithouse is incredible. This Here Ain't Water, brilliant. Broadcast Time Away is maybe my favourite song of 2024, although there is some very stiff competition for that. Dig, brilliant. Trees, that's great. Absolutely just bangers upon bangers upon bangers upon bangers on that album. And I feel like this album is no different quality-wise, really. Still fantastic, vivid lyricism, a lot of humour, a lot of, very deep emotion when you kind of look underneath it a little bit. Some very grimy and pretty basic, but also very compelling production and instrumentals going on here as well. It's just not quite clicked with me instantly. Again, like with maybe Viagra Boys, it's still of very high quality objectively in my opinion, but it just doesn't quite have that same instant wow factor as maybe the debut did. I do think I need to listen to it more, because even upon listening to it a few times, there are a few songs that I think are fantastic. Hugger Bastard and Slow Horses, or Thin Horses particularly, are two absolute highlights for me. So, but best believe me, I will be going back. But even now, I think it is very, very strong. And it still made it into my top 10 of the year anyway, so that's always good. And what I also enjoyed was yet another surprise release, the surprise release of the brand new Public Enemy album, Black Sky Over the Projects, which I wasn't expecting at all, given it was a surprise release, but I really got into Public Enemy hardcore this year, and I absolutely loved it when I heard this album dropped, because it's just their classic Public Enemy, boom bap sound, really great grimy production, a lot of really cool kind of rock crossovers at a lot of points throughout the album, but also just really socially conscious lyrics from Chuck, a lot of really fun interjections from Flavor Flav as well, a lot more straight up rapping from Flavor Flav than I think any of us expected, but for me that's always a positive, because to me Public Enemy, it's not, I know for Public Enemy some people it's like Public Enemy is just Chuck D and Flavor Flav is basically just a clown, but I feel like, for me Public Enemy is definitely more a band of two halves, and so to see that be put into actuality, maybe more than on any other Public Enemy album before it, is definitely a reward. And some of the production, as kind of rudimentary as it is compared to a lot of modern rap now, I think still hits incredibly hard and is still really, really great. And like I say, a lot of the lyricism and performances from Chuck and Flav are really great. I would say it's a return to form, but I think, for me, Public Enemy have never really put a foot particularly wrong as far as their recorded output, so it's just another success in a very long line of previous successes, really. This part of the year had some very, very, very solid releases. There was also the new Wet Leg album that I absolutely adored when I heard it in July. There's a lot of very lovesick, kind of fawn-like lyrics all over the album that maybe just kind of, speak to me in a sort of sentimental, kind of mushy-gushy way. Maybe, I don't know, what am I even fucking saying? But my point being, I think the lyricism on this album is very sincere, very heartfelt, very kind of poignant, also kind of cute, I guess, but it's not really going for that a lot of the time because it is also quite sexual in a lot of places as well. I mean, fair dues, do what you gotta do, it's 2025. But so I feel like a lot of the lyricism for what the album is going for is put across very, very well. A lot of the performances I also think are really, really good. Some people could say, in comparison to their previous output, it's a bit too clean, a bit too many of the edges have been straightened out. But for me, it results in more kind of straightforwardly enjoyable songs. Shay's Lounge and tracks like it are obviously very, very good. But I would say that, tracks like CPR, Davina McCall, Jennifer's Body, Pokemon, a lot of those songs for me are much more enjoyable than maybe some of the noisier songs are, which I still love really noisy post-punk music, but I think what the album demonstrated to me is that Wet Leg are just fantastic indie songwriters, and that for me shines through in every single minute of this album. And I think I was even contemplating putting it above Metal Horse and Mary and the Hyenas at one point, which shows you just how good I think it was. Granted, I think I settled it at number 2 at the time, but still incredibly strong, still brilliant, and I think it's any indie fan worth their salt, or any rock fan in general at all worth their salt, should give this album a go. It's incredible. Also, the debut from Panic Shack, who are just a really fun, raucous Welsh all-girl punk band. They were supporting Soft Play when I went to go and see them earlier on in, I think it was 2024, when I went to go and see them at the Leeds O2 Academy. Panic Shack was supporting. I thought they were great fun. Again, a perfect example of feminist messaging, but done in an enjoyable way. There's a lot of bite, yes, and a lot of self-belief and very kind of a lot of defiance, which I think is kind of obvious when you're talking about feminist punk music, but also there's a great deal of humour and a lot of satire going on, and a lot of kind of carefreeness, and again talks about sisterhood and just kind of being feminist and being obvious about that, but also having fun with it and knowing that part of it is not taking yourself so seriously, which I think is something that Panic Shack have proved themselves to be brilliant at, while still tackling really kind of, substantive issues like, body image and eating disorders on tracks like Gok Wan. And, they can do stuff like that in one breath, but also in another breath make a song called Tit School, which is about them having big tits. I mean, unless I'm losing, I may well be, missing some kind of feministic subtext about, the kind of expectations of, body image on society and blah blah blah. But even if we're disregarding all of that, it's not like it's a tasteless song. It is very, very funny even outside of that. So granted, it does get a bit one note, being a very kind of classic sounding punk album, but still very, very fun, still very well done. And I'd happily put it on just to have a bit of a laugh and a bit of a jump around my living room and stuff like that. So it's still really good, I think. Darren Malakian and Scars on Broadway also put out a new album in July that I wasn't a huge fan of, I'm going to be honest. There seems to be kind of a prevailing trend with a lot of the solo music put out by both Serge and Darren, originally of System of a Down, in that they're both alright, but something just feels like it's missing, right? Like, I think, like, I feel like the strongest solo material post-Sode was probably either Elect the Dead or Harakiri from Surge's side, although I have enjoyed both Scars on Broadway albums up until this point, but I do feel like this is definitely the weakest. Like, you can obviously hear some of Darren Malakian's songwriting talent coming through here, but I feel like also some of the riffs are kind of derivative, the production is kind of flat and a little bit weedy, and some of the lyrics are also just kind of cringe. Like, it's particularly on I don't give a fuck if you cancel me, bitch. I'll give you the middle finger. But then there are like so many instances of him just like arguing with people underneath the comments of that song that are almost comical. So, I mean, I would like to like this album, but point being, one, it's just not as good as his other ones, and two, events after that have kind of put a bit of a weird taste in my mouth about the whole thing, but that's by the by, I guess. It's still fine, it's not awful, it's not like Sleep Token levels of bad, but still one that, if you want to give it a miss, I won't entirely blame you. Tropical Fuckstorm are an album, a band rather, that, like Clipping, are very, very experimental, kind of like Viagra Boys, I suppose, in the same way, and have always kind of been on my radar as one of those bands to watch out for. You know, they're really doing something special, and I just never dived into them. So that is an instance of like a band like I had a lot of on my 2024 list, where I'm like, oh yeah, I've heard of Tropical Fuckstorm before, I'll add their album into my list, despite never having listened to a Tropical Fuckstorm song in my entire life before. But people were ranking this album at like top 10 in their end of year album lists, so I know I definitely should give it a list at some point. I know they've got a reputation for being really noisy and really loud and super chaotic, a bit like another band that are coming up in this list, and so there's no doubt that I'll probably enjoy it a fair bit. I just haven't got around to it yet. What I did get round to listening though was the new Quadeca album Vanisher Horizon Scraper, which I think I vaguely mentioned in my weird album rollouts video for just how much of a circus the build up to this album was. He was hyping up this thing like it was the next coming of Jesus. Like, for God's sake, man, why are we doing this? And then when the album dropped, yeah, it was pretty good. Although I do feel like I'm getting an issue with Quadeca increasingly, where the ideas are admirable and the craft behind them is certainly admirable, but the songs don't necessarily seem to translate in the same way, if you see what I mean. Like, I Didn't Mean to Haunt You in 2022. Incredible album. Fantastic album. Unbelievable songs all across that thing, right? But also, the production was super layered. There was a lot of really conceptual lyricism. There was a lot of sound play going on in terms of the production as well. So all this super duper high concept stuff, but also the great songs underneath it. Whereas now, I feel like increasingly, while there are still great songs on this album, undeniably, like, Godstained is incredible, Monday is pretty good, Natural Causes, I remember really liking, The Great Bakunawa with Danny Brown, also very, very good. You know, Forgone is another one of those really long, kind of winding, incredible journeys with some great string sections, all that stuff. You know, great songs are still there, but I feel like increasingly with Quadeca albums, it's the ideas and the craft and the mood over songmanship for me. I just feel like the ideas are there, and I love the ideas, and the attention and the detail that was put into them is incredible, and I absolutely respect it, but the songs just don't quite grab me or gravitate towards me in the same way as the tracks on Didn't Mean to Haunt You did, which that is absolutely just a personal thing, because I know that so many people absolutely adore this album, with good reason, might I add, but it just doesn't quite click in exactly the same way for me, which I think is a real shame, because I do think genuinely that I am missing out on a fair bit, but that's just how I am. You know, I don't really have a particularly good explanation for it, but hopefully I've kind of made my case at least a little bit. One album that I was genuinely disappointed at, I mean, I was disappointed that I didn't enjoy the Quedeca album as much as I did, but I did kind of have a sneaking suspicion that that might be the case going into it after I was a bit lukewarm towards Graveyard, or Scrapyard rather. But one album that I was genuinely disappointed by was the new baby metal album, Metal Fourth, which I thought their previous album, the other one, was, yeah, there was still some, like, kinks to iron out in terms of it being super overproduced, super polished, very technical, very much a kind of computerized pop kind of production company way of making a metal album, which makes sense because the three girls in the band are, members of an idol agency in Japan with a whole company behind them engineering their songs for them. So obviously they're going to sound like they've been left in the oven a bit too long, right? Especially with the fusion of like J-pop and electronic and rap and metal and all, like a billion different other things. Like, it's obviously going to be a lot to put into the musical soup, shall we say. But I feel like the other one, despite still having a few teething problems, was easily their most mature, their best written. The songs were a lot stronger across the board. They felt a lot less tackier despite a lot of the genre fusions that were going on. Even the implementation of things like auto-tune, for the most part, were done very, very well. The vocal performances, even aside from that, were also very good. So I was hoping with their next album they'd continue to expand on that. But as the singles came out and once the album dropped in full, I realised that they'd just gone back to being tacky again for the most part. Now, there are some good songs on this album. From Me to You featuring Poppy, that's one of the most animalistic vocal performances I've heard from Poppy, hands down, ever. I mean, granted, I'm not a massive Poppy enthusiast, but still, the fact remains. Kawaii is fairly enjoyable, despite being pretty tacky with the way the trap drums are utilised. I did have fun listening to that. I think Sunset Kiss and My Queen with Polyphia and Spirit Box, respectively, were also pretty good. But I just feel like the big budgetness and the tackiness was like amped up to 10 for this album. Because I think there's only 3 tracks on the album without a collaborator on it. And so it very much feels like, again, returning to that big budget Hollywood way of making a pop metal album. And, some of the songs still do kind of translate, like, some of the ones that I've just mentioned. But I feel like a lot of the time it's collaborations for collaboration's sake. Some of them don't really work very well. A lot of the sounds, particularly on tracks like Ratata or Metal with Tom Morello, are just very, very forced and kind of cartoonish in a way, particularly like Metal with Tom Morello. I get that they're Japanese, and so it's not like racist, obviously, to do like a Japanese type like sounding song, but there is something that feels a bit kind of Charlie Williams about it, maybe, about the whole thing about leaning into Japanese and doing like a really over-exaggerated like Japanese accent, and the plucky strings on it. It feels like self-satire in a bit of a weird way. It left a bit of a weird taste in my mouth. And on a whole, I was just really disappointed by the album, which I really hoped I wouldn't be, because their last album was showing some really strong signs of improvement. Anamanaguchi was also another one that I haven't listened to yet, but I have enjoyed a lot of Anamanaguchi's output in the past. Although part of me thinks this new one might be a bit more difficult for me to get into, because a lot of their stuff in the past has leaned into a more openly kind of electronic, slightly chiptune influenced sound, whereas this one seems to be just more of a straight rock album from the singles that I heard, which, as a rock fan, not obviously a bad thing, but given what I normally go to Anamanaguchi for, whether I will quite connect with it in the same way as I have some of their previous material, especially USA, I'm not too sure, but we shall see in future, I suppose. One album that absolutely kicked off a craze for me in 2025. Oh, no, it didn't. But one album that I was very looking forward to because of a craze kicked up by me in the previous year was the brand new album from Joey Valence and Bray called Hyper Youth. Now, I listened to their album No Hands in either the very early stages of last year or the very late stages of 2024, and I absolutely loved it. I think, it's like that fusion of kind of boom bap style production, but also with very colourful modern elements in there as well. Like John Cena off of No Hands is basically a rage track, which is super cool. You've got that kind of retro, sort of really lyrically centred, hard-hitting production, but also with a lot of the really colourful production bells and whistles that adorn modern rap nowadays. So that cross-section, I think, works incredibly well. There's a definite Beastie Boys influence, which I love to death. So it was no surprise that when they announced they were dropping a new album, I was absolutely beyond excited, and my God, did it live up to the hype. This was my number one for so long. It nearly squeaked it out as number one because, my God, the quality of the songs on this thing. The title track, Hyper Youth, lives up to the title. So hype, so energetic, so much fun. The lyrics throughout this album are hilarious. Joey Valance and Bray clearly have an incredible chemistry. The beats on here put together by Joey are so varied, so colourful, all incredible, all fantastic, all just dance floor ready from minute one. From like really colourful dubstep flips to like straight up boom bap to like some mid-2000s Britney Spears type stuff to a completely out of left field Africa Bambaataa interpolation to some of the slow jam type songs going over really, really well as well. Both of their talents in singing coming on a fair bit on this album, but the MO of this album is fun. I remember in 2023, I praised Willie J. Healy's Bunny for being a totally and completely just fun album. And this, I think, is 2025's counterpart because it's just so much fun, so colourful, so much charisma. The lyrics are hilarious and really well done. It's just music that is incredible, made by friends for the purpose of dancing to it, for having a good time, and my God, does it do its job incredibly. I have no other words to say, really. Also, another great album that came out was from Deftones. I know that I said in my Genre Fusions video, I believe, that nu metal was having a bit of a resurgence because of TikTok, and one of the major beneficiaries of this, I believe, was Deftones, who have had a massive, massive surge in popularity, particularly over the last couple of years, and I, for one, have loved Deftones for quite a while peripherally. I've never listened to any of their albums in full before now, full disclosure, but I always had a couple of their songs in rotation fairly regularly. I listened to a lot of their early stuff, particularly like going to the gym and stuff like that. That would be on fairly regularly. And so when my friend Alex said that he was looking forward to the new Deftones album, and in fact was going to see them, I was so jealous. But then I followed the lead up to the album. The singles were great, and when the album dropped, it was also great, because I've had problems with Deftones albums in the past. I mean, the riffs and the grooves have always been great, right? Like the way that Deftones does things, just like their grooves hit like trucks. The guitar work is really atmospheric and beautiful, and that kind of the kind of clash between those two things is oftentimes really compelling for me. And Chino's lyrics are often very emotive as well. The only problem I really had is that Chino's vocals could oftentimes get quite high-pitched and screechy and kind of annoying, and so I really hoped that with this new album, with a whole new sect of fans, that they would maybe rein that in a little bit, and I'm happy to say that they did, because the quality of the songs on this thing, my God, Mind is a Mountain, absolutely incredible song. I loved Souvenir as soon as I heard it, although I think from a couple of people that I've seen, they say that's one of the weaker tracks. Cannot understand why. Love it. Cut Hands also had a bit of a kind of throwback nu metal rap verse thing going on just a little bit, which, might be a little bit tacky, but I still love it. I feel like the extended outro on Departing My Body, for as much as I normally hate shit like that, it does actually go over quite well, and they do it quite beautifully. I think there are a few other extended coda moments on the album as well that I would normally find tedious that actually go over very, very well. And this album is also surprisingly trim, which I think is always a point in any album's favour, is, do the job, do it really well for a short time, get the job done, and then get out. You've said what you needed to say, enough's enough, bang, there you are. And this album, for me, is one of the ones in 2025 that epitomise that. Granted, I haven't gone back to it as many times as I maybe would like to, but I remember, even as a fan of Deftones, being genuinely impressed by just how consistent and high quality it was, how hard-hitting the riffs were, how great some of the guitar work was, how beautiful some of it was as well. So that was one that I was definitely very, very impressed by. What I would have liked to be more impressed by was the new Pendulum album, but as I said in my weird album rollouts video, only 4 of the tracks on the album are actually brand new. 12 of them, or I think 11 of them, were either released as singles before the album's main release, or were the 8 tracks released on EPs like at least 4 years prior to the album coming out. Now, it's come out since then that this is due to label and contractual problems, which obviously they can't help, but it did kind of take the wind out of its sails a little bit, with over 75% of the album having been heard by me already prior to its release. And it also doesn't help that 2 of the 4 new tracks were minute-long interludes, although I will say that the 2 tracks that they left for the album, Archangel and also Cartagena, were 2 of the best tracks on the album. And I feel like, viewing it in totality, it's still incredible. It's a great drum and bass album. Some great rock fusions in there as well. It's Pendulum doing Pendulum sound. I think the best that they've ever done it. I'm tempted, actually, thinking back on it. I love In Silico so much, right? That album is incredible. The debute's fantastic as well. I feel like I might want to call this my favourite Pendulum album. Because, forget me having heard the material on it before, right? If the material slaps, the material slaps. And my God, does the material slap. Driver is just a great classic, really noisy drum and bass track. You get tracks like Nothing for Free, which are more kind of instrumental, kind of motivational pop sounding tracks, like, big room EDM type stuff that's great. The Joey Valence and Bray feature on Napalm, as brief as it is, I really liked. The crossover with Bullet for My Valentine, brilliant. As I've said, Cartagena and Archangel, also really good. Colourfast has some great use of horns and orchestrations in there. Silent Spinner has grown on me a hell of a lot more than it did when it first came out on the Anima EP in 2023. I just feel like the quality of the songs speak for themselves, whether I'd heard them 4 years prior or not. So, regardless of my personal feelings of how it came about, well done, Pendulum, because this album, at the end of the day, is just fantastic, whichever way you slice it. There was also a very, very compelling album put out by Nova Twins this year, who were actually a band who were in my periphery for a while. I'd heard about them, a lot of really cool hype about them. Another classic example of a fusion band. There's some punk stuff in there, some new metal, some goth, some electronic, everything going in there, all in a big soup, the kind of stuff that I normally gravitate towards. And so I thought, you know what, this album, I'm actually going to sit down and really properly give it a chance right straight away, because for me, there was palpable hype here, and I'm happy to say that it lived up to it. Some really cool, hard-hitting fusions all across this album. Fantastic songwriting. Granted, I can't remember it very well, because, truth be told, I haven't listened to it a lot since it came out. I think I listened to it twice within the week that it came out, and then I've only revisited select tracks since. But I do think that were I to revisit it in a more complete form, I would still love it. Granted, tracks like an NOVA are maybe a little bit corny for my taste, with the whole cheerleader thing going on in the chorus, but tracks like Hummingbird, I think with their kind of gothic, eerie tone that they take, are incredibly compelling. And there are a handful of other tracks as well, like Parallel Universe, and I think Hurricane is another one like that, are incredible. But then just, the straight up hard-hitting, like just really raucous, fun, like punch you in the face tracks are also really great. It might be a bit all over the place for some people because you'll get like, like an industrial guitar riff and then break beats and then like a sort of gothic choir vocal going on top of it. So again, a lot of elements to keep track of, but there's a lot of really, really cool stuff. And in fact, given the fact that I can't really explain this album to you very well, is kind of making me ashamed and actually making me want to go back and listen to it because I know how good it is. It was easily in my top 15 this year. Granted, I haven't compiled the whole list because obviously I haven't listened to every album in the playlist yet, as has been made abundantly clear. But once I have, at whatever point that is, I will put a list in the description when I eventually do that, probably in like June of this year or something, knowing me, but still. And then there was the Halloween album that came out as well that some of the singles were pretty good, but for me there wasn't really that interest to go and listen to it in full, just because I don't really feel like Halloween is particularly my thing. I mean, they're one of the OGs of power metal, and because of my collaborations with Spud over the years, I've become exposed and actually kind of enjoyed a fair bit of that stuff. But Halloween just never quite scratched that itch that even bands like Sabaton or Powerwolf did. So again, were I to visit this album in full, I might enjoy some of it, but probably not to the degree that I would go out of my way to go and listen to it of my own volition, like actively, if that makes sense. Then September rolled around, and that was a really strong month for releases because to start off with, on the 5th of September, we had the new Faithless album, Champion Sound, which again I referred to in my weird album rollouts video about like why the fuck are they doing it, like releasing it in quarters. That is dumb and it's stupid and it kills your hype, which I do still stand by very much so. But again, like with the Pendulum album, when you actually view it as a collective experience and you put all the songs back next to each other in an hour and 15-minute long album, yeah, it's quite an undertaking, but man, is it rewarding. Like, the opening quartet of tracks are incredible. In Your Own Groove featuring LSK I'm glad to actually have LSK on a track that I genuinely enjoy, because, some of their appearances on All Blessed were a bit underwhelming for me, so it's great to have them back on top form. Fugitive is just a classic Faithless instrumental track I really enjoyed. Peace and Noise is also a much better implementation of Sully Breaks as a vocalist than a lot of what you found on All Blessed, where they just kind of used him in places where he wasn't really needed, or he kind of maybe felt a bit muted. Peace and Noise feels like a genuinely, like they looked at his talents and they knew exactly where to put him. And I feel like the breadth of collaborators on this album is definitely a help in that regard. I think the suite with Nathan Ball and Amelia Fox in the middle of the album is incredibly moving and very cinematic and very kind of emotive, and there's a real kind of sort of 80s low rider kind of vibe going on with some of that stuff to me, which I think is a mode that they've not really explored a lot of on their previous material, maybe a bit on the dance with tracks like Flying High maybe, and I feel like it's like a zone that they could very easily zone in on more in future because they do it really well. I also think that the 20-minute long Sweet Book of Hours as kind of a more of a trip hop like cinematic film score type thing, like actually film score, because I think that's what it was originally conceived as, goes over really, really well. Some of the synth textures on that are absolutely beautiful, and the beats, while understated, do add a lot to it for sure. And then the final quartet of tracks being kind of more, or I should say quintet, because there's 5 of them, being kind of just more straight in your face dance tunes, I think also works as a really nice bookend. Like with the first half or the first quarter, you've got the final quarter being kind of more just straight dance tunes that are all really good. Find a Way, again, a much better Sully Breaks feature than I would have expected. Dollars and Dimes with BB Rexha. The time that I heard that Faithless were doing a song with BB Rexha, I don't think I've ever cringed so hard at the idea of something before, but it actually goes over way better than you'd expect. The reggae track, the title track with LSK, fantastic. And I think the tracks with Emmanuel Jal and Anthony Zmerick are also incredible. I'd say I like Emmanuel Jal maybe a little bit more, or Emmanuel is just the song. Emmanuel Jal's the featured artist. I'd say I like that more because it's a bit cleaner, a bit more kind of pristine, but also the beats hit hard. The vocals are really airy and ethereal and interesting. I think Emmanuel also has a pretty compelling performance on the track. But then I also think the closing track with Anthony Smerick, the way that the beats are a bit more lo-fi, a bit rough and tumble, there's a bit of that sort of lo-fi grit to it, I think is also kind of a cool zone for them. So, as much as I did hate the fact that they released it in such a stupid way, I think, again, like with Pendulum, the quality of the tracks speak for themselves. Same with the new horror album, Tomorrow We Escape. Easily their best. This thing's brilliant. They cover so much ground, horror, on their previous releases. And for me, they are the epitome of just like all the cool shit ever in music in one artist. Like, you've got big beat and breakbeat music in there. You've got hardcore punk. You've got metal, new metal, noise, industrial, trance, dark, like gritty, deep southern trap, modern, like rage type trap music. All this stuff just gets thrown into a big musical stirring pot, and horror are the, demented alchemists that eventually bring it to life. And this is easily the best album that I think they've done in their entire career. Not to say that their previous material has been bad, because I've absolutely adored some of their previous output, but this is just on a whole other level. Like, the tracks that definitely seem in their wheelhouse, like Target Practice, Okay I'm Reloaded, all those harsh industrial textures, the super biting, snarly delivery from both Yeti Bones and OGM, incredible on those tracks. Same on Incline, with features from the Nova Twins, Pink Sifu and Young Skirt, works really, really well as a kind of hyperactive, busy, bustling, cypher type cut, which is great. But then also, there are so many sonic left turns that they take on this album that are new even for them. I Miss Home, the opening track with Moroff, is just like a really cool, gritty, like industrial cinematic piece. No beats at all just like vocal snippets and synths and things, but the mood that it creates and the intensity is incredible. Escape being kind of a more almost straight like pop punk track, if you like, absolutely wipes the floor with a lot of those types of tracks off of Skin that was produced by Travis Barker, which just for me in parts felt way too poppy for them, way too kind of polished, and just it felt like they were forcing a square peg into a round hole a little bit. And so to see them to take this sound but take it into much more horror-like and much more grittier territory is great. I think also the more atmospheric kind of lopsided beats on Psychic Jumper are super interesting. I think the overt metalcore influence on Upside Down goes over like an absolute barn burner. I think that as well, the closing kind of few tracks on this album, like with Metal Horse, this thing really pulls out all its punches right at the last minute. So you have Tapeworm with Greg Puciato, which is maybe the kind of blueprint for everything this album stands for. Like, you go from like these really dark, gritty industrial synths into this like really like clamoring, clanging breakbeat that sounds really metallic and kind of dirty and gristly and just like super energetic. And then you go into Greg having these like animalistic, like throat shedding screams going straight into these like grindcore type blast beats. It's absolutely unbelievable. It's just such a wild ride. And then Immortal with Chelsea Wolfe going for kind of a more 80s kind of synthwave, kind of dark synthwave industrial thing, but with, some really chunky 80s type drums with her great kind of ghostly vocals over the top of it, and then obviously the Horror guys doing some great lyrics underneath it. And then LA Riots, just another great punk song. Horror have always had those couple of tracks that are just more straight hardcore punk songs, homages to bands like Minor Threat, things like that. They always go over well, so it's no surprise that this is incredible here as well. And then Godflesh, which they actually premiered on a radio show prior to the album's release, is just brilliant. Like the super confident and like gnarled teeth rap deliveries on the verses on the track, the just absolutely manic hardcore punk and blast beat parts, the bursts of industrial noise that come throughout bits of the track. Just this whole thing, this whole album just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes for 35 minutes and does not let up for one single second. And yet within that, they cover so much territory that should put even most fusion bands to complete shame, which I think is definitely admirable and makes for easily, in my mind, a top 3 album of the year. I think my top 3 albums of the year are probably Horror at number 3, Joey Valence at number 2, and then an upcoming album at number 1. And I think Metal Horse and Mary and the Hyenas just scraped below that into number 4. But believe me, all of those top spots were in heavy, heavy, heavy contention. And then we have also Icy Stars with their brand new album that has also been kind of 3 years in the works at the time that it came out. But like with many albums that have had a bit of a weird release this year, the quality of the songs speaks for themselves. I spoke about Icy Stars in the Sleep Token video about how their early stuff has aged like milk, and it has, you know, a lot of those really amateurish fusions of like mid-2000s dance pop and metalcore and like electronic that just absolutely sound rancid to most people's ears today. But for me, I've got a real soft spot for them, so I cannot, despite myself, bring myself to hate it. And I feel like they definitely have matured with some of their more recent output, you know, starting with Treehouse and then with this album. They've just become masters, in my opinion, of taking what is ostensibly a metalcore album, but really tastefully weaving in elements of electronic music, industrial music, dance pop, all kinds of things like that. Putting aside my love for the band for a minute, like, I can see how songs like 3D, you just like any like musician would look at that and go, what the fuck are they doing? Because I get it, right? And even tracks on like later albums like New Demons, where they were more openly embracing those kind of deep, dark, kind of bro step aesthetics, you know, I can totally see the sort of disgusted music critic reactions as being fairly warranted. But I feel like what they've been doing on their more recent material has been so much more tasteful, so much more well written, so much better executed than it has been ever before. I think that's to do with, you know, Icy Stars as a band maturing as songwriters, maturing as musicians, Devin Oliver becoming a much better singer over time as well. I feel like a lot of the melodies across this album are incredible. The way that they kind of balance light and shade throughout the album is really, really good. You know, you have these really super hard-hitting drum and guitar grooves, you know, but then they'll be kind of adorned with these really beautiful, twinkly kind of synthesizer soundscapes, and really kind of soaring vocal melodies over the top. How these all coalesce, I'm not entirely sure, but somehow they manage it. I get the argument where some people might say that, you know, it's maybe a bit too melodic for a metal album for their taste, which I kind of get, because there are a select few moments where I'm willing it to have like a bit more bite to it. But for the most part, these are just incredibly well written, incredibly melodic, yes, but incredibly well written, very well executed, also quite hard hitting in a lot of places as well. Just very seamless metalcore electronic fusions all the way throughout this album. Some great melodies. I feel like the concept also carries through very, very well throughout the album, and I feel like it's also the most cohesive album that Icy Stars I think I've ever put together, in terms of the sound that they were reaching for, that they were shooting for, actually being able to nail that down and execute it properly. I mean, you could say that their earlier albums definitely had a definable sound, but they were shooting all over the shop on those earlier albums, whereas this one, you know, the fusions are there, they're prominent, but they're focused and they're well crafted, and they feel like they were done with purpose. And so the result is just a really good metalcore album, in my opinion. Again, one that maybe some people would want to have a bit more teeth. For me, I really, really enjoyed it. And then on the same day, we had the new 21 Pilots album, Breach, which weirdly is kind of a similar story to I See Stars in a way, in that 21 Pilots are a band that I've always been aware of because they were kind of the omnipresent band in the alternative scene when I was growing up, right? Like they were the up and coming alternative band, but they had a serious pop appeal to them. Like some would say they weren't even alternative because they were so chart ready pretty much out of the gate. I mean, obviously their debut album was a little more theatre kid and artsy than a lot of people liked, hence it didn't do very well. But, you know, you look back at albums like Vessel, yeah, it had kind of a veneer of alternativism about it, but truth be told, tracks like House of Gold or Holding On To You were very, very radio ready. Car Radio was a huge single, you know, and same with basically everything off of Blurry Face, despite the fact that I got into 21 Pilots simply as a vessel to try and impress a girl, which is not a pun, by the way, that is genuinely how it happened. But the upshot is, I actually ended up realising that they had some really good material, and particularly when they put out their album Trench in 2018, I was very, very, very impressed by that. It just seemed like such a step up from everything they'd done before. Granted, I didn't really pay much attention to Scaled and Icy when that came out, because I heard from a lot of people that it was absolute fucking dog shit, so I didn't bother really giving that much of the time of day. But then when Clancy came out in 2024, I really enjoyed that. And then when this was announced for 2025, I was also, given the quality of Clancy, very excited for it. And what I would say is that it absolutely shows 21 Pilots maturing. There are some definitely more harder edge tracks on this album. I would say that, you know, tracks like even Drum Show, for instance, the way the bass line is kind of really rollicking underneath there is a lot heavier than a lot of previous 21 Pilots material. You know, maybe not Jumpsuit level, but certainly a step up from some of the more twee stuff that they've done in the past. Definitely kind of, you know, getting a more mature sound, a more kind of built out, muscly sound to them, which I think actually suits them rather well. And I think, you know, hands out to the production, because, you know, the drums on this album hit so much harder, and a lot of the synthesizers also come through really sharp and really clear and really clean, which is great. But a lot of the melodies are really good on this album as well. I really enjoy, again, the chorus on Drum Show is great. Days Lie Dormant is, for me, the standout track on the album, just because of how much of a great pop song that is. The chorus on that thing, and the groove and everything else about it. Tyler's vocal performance is fantastic. But then other tracks that are more kind of, you know, understated, like Downstairs, Robot Voices, One Way is maybe a bit more chipper, but there is still that very cinematic, kind of gothic, slightly emo tinge to it that 21 Pilots have always played with, but, you know, in a less cringeworthy way that makes you want to gouge your eyes out with a spoon, and more kind of actually genuinely interesting. They still do have problems shaking off the, like, edgy emo white boy cringe, because there are moments on tracks like City Walls or The Contract where, you know, some of those, you know, edgy white boy rap flows start coming out, and you do start to grimace and want your face shrinking inside itself. But for the most part, 21 Pilots have definitely improved, definitely matured, and the songs and the production and the performances all speak to that. I wouldn't say it's their strongest album, because I do think Clancy is stronger than this, but I think despite a few missteps, there is still definitely a lot to be enjoyed. And actually, speaking about it, it's making me want to go back to it quite soon, which I may well do. Just quickly, there's a lot of albums at this point in the year that I didn't end up actually listening to, so I'm just going to quick fire these so I can get to some of the ones that I actually did listen to that I'm looking forward to talking about. The new Maruja album, Pain to Power, heard some great stuff about it, and I normally love post-punk music, so it'd be right up my alley. I've just not had the chance to really sit down and properly digest it, because some of these track lengths suggest that it's going to be pretty damn hefty. And to be fair, some of it has maybe, that I've heard from Maruja in like preparation, like looking into them, has maybe been a bit more noise oriented and a bit less song oriented than I perhaps would like, but still more than willing to give them a chance. There was the new album from Hot Chip, who've always been kind of a band that I've admired, but just always from a distance, never quite had that interest, but hopefully I will get into it at some point. Flavor D, her new album is just kind of a classic, no strings attached, very straightforward drum and bass album. I've only listened to about half of it, picking various tracks and things and singles and what have you, but despite its very kind of basic, bare bones, at least in terms of some of what's out there now, drum and bass, really cool kind of reggae style MCs, some absolutely filthy bass lines all over this thing. It'd be great to put on in the background, maybe not for like deep, intense listening, but that's not really what it's for. But a lot of the stuff that I've heard from it has been a pretty good time. There was also the album from Sparks, who had a great feature on one of the singles from Gorilla's upcoming album, so I threw them in there just out of pure curiosity. So should I ever visit that, which I plan on doing, I'm sure there'll be some fun to be had there. There's also Death in Vegas, who I believe began as more of a big beat act, but have slowly kind of gone into more cinematic and murky and more experimental territory, which honestly, I don't know why I was expecting like a true blue big beat album from anybody in 2025, but even if they are going in some more obscure territory, I'm sure there's still some stuff I could enjoy, even if I wouldn't probably have enjoyed it nearly as much. I probably would have enjoyed it a fair bit more if it was just a breakbeat album, I think is what I'm saying. But regardless, I'm sure there's stuff to get into there. Death Heaven, who was a band I was really, really into when I was about 13 or so, I think. Their fusion of black metal and shoegaze has always been of great interest to me. I remember when they put out, I believe it was their previous album before this. No, it was a couple albums before, but their album, Ordinary Corrupt Human Love, I was around for the release for that and loved it. So there's no doubt that I'll probably love a lot of the stuff on this new album as well, because I have actually heard some quite good stuff about it where I didn't hear the same hype around Ordinary Corrupt Human Love, which was an album that I enjoyed anyway. So the fact that I'm hearing hype around this one is definitely a good sign. And also Vimic, the last band of Joey Jordison before he passed away in 2021, rest in peace, they put out their full final album with him. I haven't quite got around to listening to it just because I'm not really into the more straightforward dark metalcore stuff, just because I don't find it quite as interesting as when bands like that mix it with other things. But I'm sure that some of the songwriting prowess and Joey's drumming would shine through anyway. Getting to the albums that I did listen to though, as we enter into October. The first one being the brand new Holly Cook album, Shy Girl, which I absolutely loved. It's more of a pop reggae album, which might seem a bit far afield for me as far as, music choices go, but I've always thought Holly Cook was a fantastic vocalist, always thought her choices of instrumentals were super fun and light and breezy, and she always had just such a compelling vocal presence to her, just in general, aside from vocal talent, just, for lack of a better phrase, when she steps, a Holly Cook song when you hear one. And I've really enjoyed as well some of her feature appearances, like on the Don Letts album in 2023. So when this came out, there was no doubt in my mind that I was going to have a very, very good time listening to it. And so I did, because there was a lot of super, super strong material here. Shy Girl, obviously the title track was great. I remember really enjoying Frontline and We Share Love as well as singles, but also some of the deeper cuts like River Runs Deep, Hello Operator, kind of Rockaway as well, Night Night, Holding On. There's kind of like, it's pop, like Caribbean style pop, which is not normally something I would gravitate to at all, but the way that she combines that with those really kind of deep and kind of lopsided reggae rhythm sections. I am a huge fan of reggae rhythm sections. I think a lot of reggae albums, and particularly dub albums, are just the best if you're looking for bass and drum centric stuff. So the fact that she's able to mould that with those kind of bright, summery pop sensibilities is done incredibly well by her and her production team. I also think the melodies that she sings on these songs are incredible, so catchy, so emotive, so dramatic. There's also definitely a 60s girl group influence going on with it. It's no surprise that she did a Shangri-La's cover on her first album, because that influence definitely comes through here, and it is very much well liked by me. And I just think that, as far as pop albums go this year, yeah, it might not be the most straightforward sonically pop album that you would have heard last year, but if it isn't a good one, my goodness me, it is so quality. I know that it may seem a bit one note and a bit kind of, because a lot of the songs are about love, relationships, etc., etc. So it might be seem to be kind of treading the same ground for a lot of people if you really want to be critical. But if you want a lovely, breezy, highly melodic, really catchy, really well-produced pop album to put on and have a nice sit-down and a beer on a Friday afternoon, this is the album for you. And I say that not in a derisory way at all, because I think it's really, really something special. One album that I was also quite interested in is the new Pop Will Eat Itself album, Delete Everything, which Pop Will Eat Itself, again, have been one of those fusion bands that I've particularly gravitated towards in the last year or so, because they have some really great tunes. It's kind of, I believe it's called Grebo, is the sound that they had, at least in their early days, which is kind of a combo of indie and punk and industrial and electronic music, more particularly. And so, going into this album, first new Pop Will Eat Itself album in over 10 years, I'm pretty sure. How could I not be excited? And for sure, a lot of the singles like Bruiser and Disco Misfits and their version of Their Law, which was originally a collaboration with The Prodigy, of course, Built for Fun, was pretty good as well. So, given the quality of the singles, I'd have no reason not to be excited. But then when the album actually dropped, it became clear to me that the singles were definitely where the power lied, because the production and the sounds are all still there, but not with nearly the same amount of punch or vibrancy or actual song power as a lot of the single tracks may have suggested. Player Fasten is a perfect example, right? That starts off with some really cool, intriguing synth melodies going through the intro, but then when it cuts into a weird lopsided gabba groove for the chorus that just sounds really irritating and really out of place, there were just some decisions on this album where you're working with such a good blueprint, and the singles seem to indicate that you were going in the right direction, but then on a lot of the deeper album tracks, they just seem to willingly squander their own potential, which, for me, as a Pop Will Eat Itself fan, was very, very annoying, because I really wanted to like this album a lot more than I think I do. It's not awful, but the singles are definitely the standouts, which for me is something you want to avoid whenever you put an album out into the world. One album, on the other hand, that I was pleasantly surprised by was the new album from The Orb called Buddhist Hipsters, which I always kind of got the impression of people talking about The Orb, especially in recent years, that it was kind of in the olden days with fluffy little clouds and stuff like that, they really had something going, that kind of, they always kind of positioned themselves as the band you would listen to coming down from drugs, rather than the dance band that you would listen to while you were on drugs. So, there was always that sense that, in the early days, they really struck that balance between atmospheric melodies and kind of transcendental structures with still kind of pretty hefty danceable beats. But I got the sense from reading some comments from people that I'd seen that they'd kind of maybe lost their way a little bit and gone a bit too far into overly modular, wanky synth soundscape territory. And so going into this album, I was kind of dreading that I was just going to sit and listen to somebody fucking wanking away on an Oberheim for 70 minutes. But actually, I got a lot more from this album than I expected. There are a few of the more kind of synth soundscape type tracks, like on Under the Bed or The Closer, which are maybe two of my least favourite tracks on the album for that reason. But a lot of the rest of it, though, strikes that balance that I feel like they did in the early days. A lot of really cool, interesting, cinematic, very deeply layered and textured synth soundscapes, but underneath it, a really pumping, sturdy and really groovy rhythm section underneath it that makes it feel like much more of a dance album than I ever would have expected. I mean, Sound the Alarms, dance band releases dance album, but given the way that people were talking about them, I don't know what I was expecting, but it certainly wasn't this, but it was a welcome surprise, because even tracks like It's Coming Soon, or the Earth Cloud, or the Uert Cloud, I'm not even sure how you would pronounce that, but the way that they managed to balance those, the kind of ethereal synths that I was expecting with some still pretty pumping Daft Punk inspired house beats was such a breath of fresh air, such a welcome surprise, and honestly made it, I think I could probably call this album the most surprising success of 2025 by quite some distance, because I'll be honest, the bar was quite close to the floor. So not only did they exceed my expectations, they fucking jumped over that bar to the moon with this album. Again, not perfect, but it's a damn sight better than I ever would have expected. And so now we come to what is my favourite album of 2025, and that is, of course, Censor's Sonic Dissidence, their first album in 12 years since the release of To The Capsules in 2013, and I think, personally, it is their best since Stacked Up, their debut in 1994. You heard me right, people, because I feel like, as they said in their press release, and often bands in their press releases, they say things because they want to sell records, of course, I get that, right? But this is like a whole other kettle of fish, because they said that this, to them, was the most kind of accurate representation of the Censor ethos to date that they'd ever recorded. And I have to say, I agree, because this album, if anything, it does well, right? If you have never heard Censor before, this is the perfect album to listen to get into them, right? As much as I think Stacked Up is my favourite, there are definitely some songs on that album that are not indicative at all of any direction that they ever would go in the future. I mean, granted, those songs are still cool, but definitely outliers. Whereas this, I feel like, is just the perfect representation of everything Censor stand for, everything they're amazing at, everything they just excel at, proving why they are easily one of the best rap metal groups to ever exist in the history of time ever, right? And they do it in a really short, sharp time span. No fluff, no filler, no nothing. Just get in there, get the job done, absolutely pummel you with fantastic tracks, and just piss off. And then that's the album. 11 tracks, 45 minutes. Really straight, really to the point, really ferocious, really great. The more straightforward metal tracks on here, you've got Riot Pump, Harbinger, Full Body Rebellion, maybe Old World is really incredible as well. The way that they're able to so seamlessly kind of add these electronic textures and rap verses into what are ostensibly essentially crossover thrash tracks in some instances is very, very admirable. The way that they kind of combine electronic and acoustic beats on tracks like Optimus is incredible. And I also think that, on top of the grooves hitting super hard, on top of the electronics being utilised really, really well, on top of like everything to do with the instrumentals, I think the real star of the show is the vocalists here, who are Hytham, Al Saeed and Kirsten Haig, who I actually had the pleasure of interviewing in 2024, and they were just the loveliest people to start off with. But they did make allusions before this album had been announced to the fact that the roles were kind of metamorphosizing a little bit. Like, Kirsten was rapping a bit more, Hytham was singing a bit more. There's going to be a bit more vocal variety on this album, and it does deliver. I feel like a lot of Hytham's sung choruses on tracks like Optimus and Old World go over a lot better. I feel like the tracks where maybe Kirsten takes the reins a bit more, like maybe End of Days or Heirloom, are incredible. I feel like it's some of her best vocal work that she's done on any Censor album to date, because it's often very difficult with such kind of, contrasting ideas, like with any fusion band, to kind of find your own pocket and fit in there. But it's as if these songs are purpose-built to kind of accommodate everything that Censor is good at. And obviously you'd expect a band with a sound to be able to do that. And I know that this might not make a lot of sense, but to me, it feels like these songs could not have been crafted any better. Like, the way that the guitar riffs are incredible, the drums are fantastic, the electronic textures feel so seamless, the vocal lines are fantastic, the lyrics are super biting and conscious and passionate. The vocal performances are just off the charts. This is, for me, hands down the best album this year. No competition. It's the best album they've put out since their debut in 30 years. I'm so hyped to see them live in June. That's going to be incredible. Even some of the tracks that are maybe a bit more left field, like Black Wings or Carrier Wave, still have some very, very admirable elements to them, whether it be the more industrial sound palette on Black Wings or a more kind of indie ballad on Carrier Wave that they actually carry off, no pun intended, incredibly well. You know, I say that this is like the typical Censor album. It's not that every song sounds the same, or else it would be incredibly boring, but they cover a lot of ground, a lot of different styles. It's incredibly well produced, incredibly well written, incredibly well performed. Just absolutely no complaints with this album whatsoever. 10 out of 10. It's the best album of the year. Go buy it. I have it on vinyl. I have a framed poster sat next to right across from where I'm recording this. Can't wait to see them in June. They are incredible. They are, in my head, the best rap metal band to ever exist. Done. Alright, I will try to cover these next ones in a decently kind of eloquent enough fashion, but I have been talking for nearly 2 hours straight now, and my voice is starting to hurt, and you're probably all getting bored, more to the point. So I will try to keep these relatively brief and not ramble too much, but if I do want to heap some praise upon an album, I shall do so. The new Sabaton album that came out, I believe the same day as the Censor album, I quite like, honestly. I think it's probably their most solid album they've put out to date. Granted, it doesn't have the high points of maybe, War to End All Wars, when that came out in 2022, but I did think that album was overall more spotty than this one was. I would say the way I would describe it is that the highs aren't quite as high on this new album of theirs, but I do enjoy that they cover a lot more historical ground than they have done on their previous few albums, which, given their MO, is very kind of admirable. And, you learn a lot more than just about the First or Second World War, which for me is a lot more interesting. But also, the quality level is just a lot more consistent as well. Like, it's not as pompous, it's not as overblown, it's not as campy, it's not as ridiculous. And so I feel like because of that, the actual quality of the musicianship and the songs shine through a bit more. Granted, like I say, there aren't the shimmering bright spots like there was with Lady of the Dark, maybe, on War to End All Wars, but on the whole, the quality level, I would say, is a lot more consistent than it has been on, I think, any other album I've heard from them previously. So, if you've not been a fan of Sabaton before, I would say maybe give this one a go, because it's probably, if there's things you don't like about them, maybe how overly pompous they are, or how there's way too much stuff going on, or, any of that kind of stuff that I've kind of alluded to in my previous coverage of them, that is dialed down a bit here. And so the quality of the songs, while again, maybe the highs aren't quite as high, you do see the quality a lot more obviously on this one, I think. There is also, I should make mention of the YouTuber Frank Jav C, who put out a series of EPs this year that were all very, very good. I thought, not like blowing me away, but still of a very high quality level. Music for Windows on the World was the first one that was kind of an atmospheric kind of vaporwave jungle fusion that I really liked. Then there was his second EP that came out that had kind of a late night kind of lo-fi house vibe, which I really enjoyed. And then there was the collaboration EP with Marion is Magical that I haven't actually listened to in full, but I believe the 2 tracks that I have heard from it, so I've heard most of it, were very, very good. I think Frank and Marion obviously being together and having a very good working relationship obviously helps the quality of the tunes, and I feel like this is some of the strongest stuff he's put out. I remember he was on a biblical run in 2019 as far as singles went, and I feel like this is kind of recapturing some of that quality because it's very homespun, very DIY, but at the end of the day, very, very fun as well. So if you're into that, definitely give those a listen. And the Lemonheads put out their first new album in nearly 20 years this year with Love Chant, which was a really cool kind of full circle moment for me because, as you know, in some of my previous coverage on this channel, the Lemonheads were a band that I and my siblings grew up with because my dad played the shit out of them in the car whenever we went anywhere, being his favourite band. And so for this to be the first Lemonheads album that I was really around for, and, you know, being able to bond with him over was really quite a special experience for me. Although, of course, it would mean fuck all if the songs were awful, but thankfully they're not, because I think Evan Dando, despite his lack of ability to play live very well these days, I'll insert a clip here of when my dad went to the tour, being one of the only gigs that he ever walked out of. Yikes. But I would say that he mostly kept it together for the album, because I feel like with his voice aging 20 years, taking on a more deep, gravelly baritone kind of feel, it definitely lends kind of an older, wiser, more laid back and less sort of peppy vocal delivery, which I think actually works better with the Lemonheads brand of like slacker rock. I think that actually, you know, him having a slightly more aged, gravelly voice actually works well for a lot of the tracks here that are kind of quite measured, quite, you know, there's rarely ever a moment where they're particularly going at like breakneck pace or anything like that. You know, there are a few kind of raucous moments, like the intro to Togetherness Is All I'm After is pretty good, or In the Margin, the intro to that is fairly noisy as well. Like, there are bits and pieces, but I'd say overall, the more kind of measured, methodical, laid-back sound of this album works very, very well, because it allows the songmanship of Evan Dando to shine through, because I feel like what this album encapsulates for me, it's not trying to be fucking To Pimp a Butterfly or Sergeant Pepper's, right? But what it is a very laid back, very casual, but also incredibly catchy and incredibly well crafted despite its kind of ramshackle demeanour. It's a very, very good power pop album. Like, the melodies are very good on pretty much every single song here. The guitar work is subtle but incredibly well done. The grooves are really sturdy, you know, keeping a nice bass for everything else to work on top of. Evan Dando's melodies are endearing. His vocals are very infectious. You know, he has this kind of elder statesman quality to him that works really, really well. Some of the more kind of musical left turns, like on Marauders with the synth bass and the horns, I think actually makes for one of the best moments on the album. The ballads are really nice on here as well. You know, The Key of Victory being perhaps the key example. And, you know, they cover a lot of ground on this album as well. You know, like Wild Thing is slightly kind of country sort of thing a little bit. As is 58 Second Song, which is maybe the most hilariously titled song this year of any artist, given that it's actually 3 minutes long. But yeah, you know, it's not like overly super duper flashy and remarkable. Wow, this album's going to blow your mind. But it is just very, very, very solid. Incredibly high quality songwriting. Very enjoyable. Very breezy. Very nice. I think that's the way that my dad has described the Lemonheads to me in the past, in the least flippant way possible. He likes the Lemonheads because they make nice songs, right? Like, they make nice power pop songs, and nice is often used as an adjective to kind of, you know, if you want to call something kind of vaguely good but it's not really worth describing. But I feel like they're very breezy, casual, light-hearted, kind of warm tone of basically every song here. If there was like a superlative version of the word nice, that is how you would describe this album. It's really good, doesn't overstay its welcome, super charming, super comforting. Just a great power pop album all around, in my opinion. The new Soulfly album, I haven't actually listened to all of, but again, Soulfly are one of those bands where I've loved a lot of their previous output, particularly some of the stuff they did in the late 90s. Their second album, for me, is just absolutely peak. the way that they kind of meld new metal and groove metal with kind of traditional Brazilian and tribal instrumentation is super cool. I think a lot of the singles off it were really, really strong, and some of the select deep cuts I've heard off it as well were also incredibly strong. So I've got no doubt that the rest of the album will do the same. A lot of people seem to really hate on Soulfly for some reason, and I genuinely can't understand why. Maybe it's because they think that the implementation of like Brazilian tribal music is kind of tacky, but honestly I don't think so. I think Soulfly have been easily one of the most kind of high quality acts to come out of even being adjacent to the new metal movement in the late 90s, in my opinion. So, why would this new album be any different? One album that is absolutely positively fantastic though is the new Peng Shui album, Guts, which I've talked about Peng Shui before. I gave their EP2 a very positive review, and I give this a very positive review as well, because again, it's another great fusion band. Because what we're dealing with here is a very kind of in-your-face, potent fusion of punk, of new metal, of electronic breakbeat music, and of early 2000s super grimy dubstep and like Dizzy Rascal style bassline music. Those are the kind of musical touchstones that we're working from here, and it is just pure aggro from start to finish pretty much. Like, just the beats are in your face, the bass lines are growling and super intense. It's just like all moshing all the time. The vocalist Illiman is, puts across his raps with such kind of venom and punch and kind of anger and potency that is super infectious. When he's doing a more metal style delivery, he's absolutely screaming his brains off, which works really, really well. There's also some more cinematic moments on this album that work really well, like the opening track featuring Pete Cannon, or Four Walls, or the track Battered Mind, which has a bit more of a reggae tinge to it as well. So they are covering different ground on this album, but for the most part, they stick to what they do best, and it works really, really well. Super dark, super hard-hitting, super grimy. I said it before in my review of their EP that their sound is basically just the auditory equivalent of being punched in the balls by a really angry, drunk man outside of a pub. And, that is the way I would describe this album, but in, the best way possible. If you just want to be, absolutely pummeled by just, super intense... It's not cerebral at all, but my God, it'll get you jumping around. So if you're in the market for just some violent, escapist, mad, nihilistic kind of angry shit, this is the album for you, right? And it's also one of the few albums where I think the interludes are warranted, because I think the sort of, the break in between them is because he actually raps on the interlude as well. It's not just 2 minutes of white noise. So I think having that kind of chapter breakup structure actually works quite well. And I also think that some of the interludes are actually a couple of the most entertaining moments on the whole album. So that's an achievement in itself, really. There are a few other albums that I didn't listen to this year that I wanted to get around to. The new Charlatans album. Again, I've loved a lot of the Charlatans output in the past. Classic 90s indie band. Why wouldn't I love this as well? I don't know. I'll get around to it at some point. Trivium, I quite like as well. Some of their other output. It is a bit kind of wanky and progressive and sort of a bit too power metal-esque at times and a bit too pompous for me to sometimes get into, but I'm always willing to give them a chance. Mode Step, I don't even know how I came across him at all, but I just remember adding this album to my playlist one day because I think it's kind of, again, another one of those electronic rock fusions that sounded like it was right up my alley. The cover art's really dark, so why the hell not? And then there's Ashes and Diamonds, which is the new band of ex-Public Image Limited drummer Bruce Smith, who I was really, really disappointed when I heard that Bruce Smith had left Pill in early 2024, because I always thought Bruce was a fantastic drummer, worked so well with Scott Firth on bass, and their formidability as a rhythm section was, to my mind, just unmatched by a lot of other bands just existing in the world in general. And so when I heard he was part of this band, just off the strength of his drumming acumen alone, I knew I had to at least put it on my radar. Even if I wasn't going to listen to it immediately, I had to at least be aware of it. So there is that. And then we get to the final two albums or releases that I listened to in the year. The first one being the debut release from Silver Wing Killer, which is an EP titled Triad Funded. And the way I would describe Silver Wing Killer, I think they came on my release radar just because Spotify guessed that I might like stuff that sounded like them, and they could not be more right, because there is definitely an Atari Teenage Riot influence going on here. Like there's some real, there's like bits of gabba in here, bits of industrial as well. It feels almost so influenced by Atari Teenage Riot that I'm tempted to say that they essentially take up the mantle as the new Atari Teenage Riot. But that's not to say that their songs are not good, because I feel like the kind of shift from a really angelic, ethereal intro to just an absolutely manic gabba section on the opening track is really great. Granted, SWK is basically just a minute and a half long, percussive exercise with some lawnmower bass noises in the background. Still pretty cool though, still gets me kind of hype. There's also Roof on Fire, which is just like, it's almost a metal song in the way that the like really crushing bass sounds just absolutely raw all over this thing, and the two vocalists in Silver Wing Killer are just screaming their brains out over it. I think is super cathartic and super fun. I also think that Jing'an Temple, with its use of kind of more boom bappy style hip hop beats on top of like these really echoey psychedelic effects and like slightly oriental synthetic instrumentation, is super cool, and definitely I'd say the track on the album where they separate themselves sonically the most, which I think is what makes it so interesting. And then Hold Up All Firearms in the United Kingdom, which with its kind of gurgling acid bass recalling artists like Josh Wink and things like that, is also a really cool moment. So I'd say this is an instance of an album where the influences could not be worn more on their sleeves, but still, if you're looking for something really cathartic and industrial and just really noisy and energetic, definitely give this a listen. And if you're an Atari Teenage Riot fan, definitely give this a listen, because in my mind there's no way you couldn't love it. And then the final album of the year was the brand new album from Juliana Hatfield, who was at one point a guitarist and backing vocalist for the Lemonheads on their seminal album It's a Shame About Ray, and so it's no surprise to me that her solo output is just as fantastic. Genuinely, I think her and the Lemonheads are jousting it out for the best power pop album of the year, because this is really strong. Maybe it's just because I find female voices inherently more interesting than male voices now. It could be, very much so, but I just feel like having that kind of really bright, breezy, sound in a lot of the instrumentation on this album be complemented by Juliana's very kind of bright and peppy and upbeat voice is such a breath of fresh air. Again, it's such a light-hearted, fun album, right? Like, Joey Valentin Bray is fun in a different way. That's like fun in terms of like, doing beer bong and going clubbing with your buddies kind of fun. This is like a fun album like Willie J. Healy's Bunny, where you can sit out doing some sunbathing on an afternoon, have this album on it, like either in the background or listening to it actively, and just have such a nice, relaxed, fun time listening to it. The way I would describe it is where the Lemonheads was maybe more laid back and more kind of chilled out and casual, this one is more hopeful, more exuberant, slightly more youthful sounding. There's a lot of retro colours on this album. There's a lot of mellotrons coloured all over this album, which gives it a very retro 70s feel. But also a lot of the production is very vibrant and very bright and very colourful as well, which makes the quality of the melodies on these songs stand out even more. I feel like that's where Juliana and the Lemonheads output kind of differ, in that with the Lemonheads being so casual and so laid back, they're really kind of leaving the quality of the songs to like carry everything else, right? Which luckily they do, and so the Lemonheads album is still great. But I feel like with this, you can feel the quality of the songs just through the passion and the fun that you can hear that Juliana is having on the album, despite the fact that a lot of the lyrics seem very personal and very vulnerable as well. I mean, there's a song on this album called Long, Slow, Nervous Breakdown, so how she managed to make that sound so peppy and upbeat and so fun is beyond me, but she does it in a fantastic way. And a lot of the melodies and harmonies on this album are incredible, whether it's on Constant Companions or Scratches or the opening track Fall Apart, or particularly on Wouldn't Change Anything and Ashes, which to me are the two centerpieces of the album, because on Ashes, which is just a very bare bones kind of electric guitar ballad, the harmonies on that are absolutely unbelievable, and just the acumen of songwriting is just, I did not. It's like, my dad said to me, oh, there's a new Juliana Hatfield album coming out. And so I thought, oh, cool, that'll be quite good, because she was a member of the Lemonheads once, and they've put out a great album this year, so surely this is going to be great. Even I didn't expect it to be of this quality. It's just, so colourful, so fun, so vibrant, very kind of retro, but also not kind of hemmed in by its own retroness. It's not Greta Van Fleet. She's not having any troubles kind of coming out of the 70s shadow, if you like, in that sense. This album really stands on its own 2 feet. The quality of the songwriting, the quality of the production. Juliana's vocals have not aged a day since the 90s. It is truly something to behold. And honestly, if I had to debate between the Lemonheads album and this one, I think this honestly might pip it to the post. And that says a lot, because they are both incredibly high quality. So that is all of the albums that I ever made note of or listened to or anything throughout the whole of 2025. I know you're probably bored out of your fucking minds right now, and my throat honestly really hurts, but at least we all stuck around for this. So what I'm going to do now, I was going to go through some of my other wrapped songs and kind of give you some recommendations there. The only things I can really scrape out of that is that the Oasis reunion got me into Oasis, because clearly before then I had them down as some kind of basic bitch meat and potatoes teenage boy bucket hat rock band. But with all the hype around the reunion this year, which was rightly hyped up, I might add, because I watched a crowd recording and that thing was incredible. But I went back to a lot of their albums, and just the quality of just the rock songwriting on all of those albums, newer and older, are incredible. I don't want to be the hipster and be like, oh, actually, Standing on the Shoulder of Giants is the best one, because I do think that, for me, definitely, maybe, probably takes the title of their best one, but do not dismiss some of their later material. In my head, Standing on the Shoulder of Giants and Don't Believe the Truth in particular are incredibly, incredibly strong. So they've got, I can thank them for that. And there's also my enjoying of a lot of Broken Transmission music, which is kind of a form of vaporwave, which is to do with very kind of lo-fi samples of things like TV adverts and atmospheric and meditation music, which might sound a bit odd, but just the headspace that it's able to put me in and the moods that it creates and it fosters is unlike anything of any music that I've ever experienced really before. The top artist for me in that genre is Infinity Frequencies and his album Between Two Worlds. Please listen to that. It's absolutely brilliant in my opinion. It might be a very tough listen for a lot of people, given just how repetitive it is and how brief a lot of the songs are and just how strange it is, but trust me, please give it a go. And then, so I suppose what I can do now is tell you what we've got to look forward to in 2026. So the albums that I have in my view so far. There's the new Dry Cleaning album that is coming out next week as I'm recording this, a week today. It may well have already come out by the time I've got this edited, so I'd be surprised if I get this video out before the end of January, to be honest, know what I'm like. But I've always kind of found it a bit difficult to get into Dry Cleaning because of Florence's vocals, but I'm really trying to chip away and give them a go now, so Hopefully I enjoy it as much as I'm hoping to. Of course, the new Sleaford Mods album, really looking forward to that. There's some very intriguing features and track titles on that. One of the songs I think may even be a redux of a song that's 15 years old at this point, before even Andrew Fern had entered the fold. So it'll be really interesting to see what they do with that. And the quality of the singles so far really speaks to themselves. So as far as I'm concerned, we can look forward to another great one there. The final Megadeth album, I'm not a massive Megadeth fan, but I thought given the occasion, I may as well give it an ear or two. It's sounding pretty alright at the moment. Granted, I'm not a thrash historian, but sounding pretty alright as far as I can work out. And also the new Cooler Shaker album, which again I've also not been a massive Cooler Shaker fan, but some of the songs that they've released before this are giving me sort of, late 90s, maybe early 2000s Primal Scream vibes a little bit, which as far in my estimation is a very, very good thing. Some of the horn sections have been really cool. A lot of the guitar work has been really good. The vocals have been really nice as well. So it's really taken me by surprise how good some of that stuff has been, given that I've only heard a handful of Cooler Shaker tracks in the past. But I'm glad I came across it, to be honest. There's also the new Joji album coming out, which so far, given the quality of the singles, is shaping up to be a lot better than Smithereens was. It's easily the longest time we've had to wait for any Joji project, but it seems to be worth it. Although at 21 tracks with an average song length of 2 minutes, I am kind of wondering and worrying, more accurately, that it'll suffer massively from modern rap album Bloat Disease, but I can only keep my fingers crossed and hope that it's varied enough to warrant its runtime. There's also the new Gorillaz album coming out that I'm super duper hyped for. That'll be great, because it's got not only of the singles have been great, but also some great current and posthumous features, including a feature from Mark E. Smith on Delirium. And I have to say, I've heard a kind of lo-fi leaked version of Delirium, and it sounds really good. So this is maybe shaping up to be the band's best album since Plastic Beach, and I do not say that lightly, because Song Machine was also incredible. There's the new EP Stupid Kids coming out from Masterpiece, who is kind of a very bright, summery, throwback indie act with a bit of rap mixed in there. It's very kind of FIFA soundtrack-esque, which I say with a great deal of love, because the FIFA 13 soundtrack to me still goes as hard as it ever did, and I feel like the fact that 2 of these tracks have ended up on the most recent FC soundtrack, as it's now known, I think is, testament to the sound that it's going for working very well. And there's also the prospect of a new Kasabian album coming out with their newest single, Hippie Sunshine, that I thought was honestly pretty good. I thought after what was a bit of a misstep, or actually, now that I think about it, a massive misstep with Alchemist Euphoria, they really found their feet with Happenings last year, and so I'm hoping that with this new album, Act 3, that they've got coming out, that they can only continue that momentum. Other releases, there's a new Streets single coming out called Sugar Cube, which is maybe the most I've been hyped for a standalone single for as long as I can remember, but some of the teasers to that thing have been incredible. Mike, please drop it now, please, I'm begging you. There's also potentially a new Willie J. Healy album coming out. That'll be really good, because Heaven Now as a single was really great. A new Deadmau5 album, which Deadmau5 has always been one of the most respectable acts for me in kind of big room EDM, and so hearing more stuff from him is always a joy. Perhaps a new Bob Vylan album as well. I mean, I did really enjoy Bob Vylan's last album in 2024, although given some of the stuff that he's been embroiled in recently that I'm not going to comment on. That aside, I have enjoyed his music, and so hopefully the new album will be just as good as the last one was. And also a new single from Ouse that just dropped today. I think a lot of the stuff he's done since Crying in Camo, as much as that album was a very, very mixed bag, has been definitely below his own personal quality standard, in my view, for a lot of it. And so hopefully with this new single actually being pretty damn good, hopefully he can kind of bring it back to a more suitable quality level for what I know he's capable of. Other albums that are coming out, there's the new Poppy album later on in January as well. And Poppy, as I said in the Genre Fusions podcast, has always been an artist that I'm willing to give another go, despite her sound. Maybe it clicks for me more with every album that she puts out. So I'm hoping with this new one, it will finally get to that point where I start to really properly enjoy her stuff. Of course, there's the new House of All album in March coming out, Inklings, who, as I said earlier, have proved themselves to be one of the most consistent and hard-working rock bands of the last 5 years, and so I've got no doubt that that album will be of a very high quality as well. Death Grips have teased a new album being in the works after 8 years, which is unbelievably hype. There's also prospects of a new Blank Banshee album, Vapor Trap Pioneer, very exciting, a new Fear Factory album, a new Incubus, all very exciting, and of course, just to cap it off, The Prodigy. I'm not going to say anything, but they are playing new shows in April. Allegedly there's going to be new tracks. I will be reviewing the show after I go to it in April, so you'll hear my thoughts on any new tracks that there are there. Allegedly there's an album coming out. I'll put it there just so it's out in the world, but should that happen, it will be their first album in 8 years, which is the longest we've had to wait for any Prodigy album to date. But all of the 3 tracks that they've played live over the last couple of years, I have loved. So may they continue that trend. I'm sure there are lots more albums coming out this year that I'll be very excited for that we just don't know about yet. So I'll keep my eyes and my ears peeled. Hopefully you will as well. And hopefully, despite my manic ramblings, you've come out of this video with at least a few recommendations that you can either take with you from this year or have a look out with for next year. So I'll stop talking now, give your ears a rest, and also give my throat a rest, and also wish you all a very, very happy 2026, because believe me, this is only the start of a lot more to come. I've got a lot of collaborations with Spud in the pipeline that are very exciting, also continuations of podcast series that I'm really looking forward to, and also some new ideas, a return of the discography guide that I'm provisionally very excited about. So a lot of really cool stuff happening. So just thanks for bearing with me, both in this video and just in general, and I will see you, I promise, more soon than you have done previously. I can't say very soon because I am lazy, but I can guarantee you'll hear from me more than 6 times this year. So there is that.